Landsberg Prison, near Munich, Germany. In 1924, the prisoner in cell number 7 conceived of a master plan to seize absolute power in a highly advanced and democratic society. He was considered a delusional egomaniac by many, but in 10 years, he achieved his goal. In 1934, German democracy was finished. Adolf Hitler was the absolute ruler. One of his first acts was to commission this propaganda film, which played to packed houses throughout Germany for months. But triumph of the will disguised the truth. There was nothing inevitable about Hitler's rise. It was equally a triumph of luck, lies, and murder. Behind the image of the infallible dictator was a man whose triumph had been far from certain. When 18-year-old Adolf Hitler arrived in Vienna in 1907, his greatest ambition was to be accepted into the Academy of Fine Arts. A small-town teenager in the big city, he had sketched and painted watercolors, including these, for several years. He was competent, but his work did not measure up to the standards of the Academy, and twice he was turned down.
Well, he was flabbergasted. It apparently never entered his head that he would fail. And so when he did fail, he was completely taken aback by it, and that was, without question, a major setback for him, a really stinging blow to his pride. And within a couple of years, he'd slumped into the dregs of society and ended up in the flophouse for tramps and down and outs and so on. People who were really down to nothing.
An outcast and a failure, Hitler's resentments shaped his actions for years to come.
It's a great pity for mankind that he wasn't accepted into the Academy. For a career as a mediocre painter, Germany would have been spared a dictator.
On August the 2nd, 1914, 25-year-old Hitler can be seen in the crowd jamming the streets of Munich to hear a fateful announcement. Germany had declared war on Russia and Serbia.
The photograph shows the beginning of Hitler's career, and he's filled with ecstasy because he's going to fight for a greater Germany. He's identifying himself personally with the cause of a greater Germany.
This gave Hitler, for the first time in his life, a real sense of purpose. He'd found his role. He belonged for the first time somewhere.
As a courier on the front line, Hitler was both brave and lucky. After several brushes with death, he was promoted to corporal and decorated. In October of 1918, he was temporarily blinded in a mustard gas attack by the British.
While he was recovering, he heard of the German surrender, and this was a devastating piece of news for him.
For the Germans, the end of the First World War was a devastating shock. In November of 1918, when the armistice was signed, German troops were still deep inside France. They occupied all of Belgium. They defeated the Russians. Also, during the course of the war, the German High Command had fed the population a steady diet of good news.
Germans at home had no idea that Germany was losing the war. So as far as most Germans were concerned, even in the last months of the war, Germany was winning.
And then suddenly, inexplicably, in November of 1918, Germany has been defeated. This strange defeat would give rise to the stab in the back theory, that the army, the valiant German army, had been stabbed in the back by some sort of domestic coalition of left liberals, meaning Jews, the Catholic Center Party, and the Social Democrats, the Marxists.
The myth itself is nonsense. The German Army High Command said in September and October 1918 that there was no way forward, that the German armies were exhausted, that Germany was at the edge of catastrophe. The big lie is the stab in the back.
In the months following the German surrender, the country was near anarchy. There was a communist revolution and a counter-revolution. And then in February 1919, in a bitterly divided Germany, a fragile democracy emerged.
But now you've got hundreds of thousands, indeed millions of armed troops back in Germany, believing that they had been stabbed in the back These would furnish the rank and file of the new wave of paramilitary organizations, which was important because many Nazis would be recruited from these units.
The government secretly allowed paramilitary organizations to flourish because the terms of the treaty that ended World War I limited the German army to a mere 100,000 soldiers. One of the paramilitary leaders was Ernst Röhm, known as the Machine Gun King for his stockpile of weapons culled from returning soldiers. He met Hitler in Munich at a meeting of the tiny German Workers' Party, which soon became the Nazi Party. Hitler was a rousing right-wing orator, railing against the Jews, the leftists, and the national government in Berlin. And then in 1923, an economic collapse plunged the country into turmoil.
And the German government responded with the printing press. They printed money until trillions of marks equaled $1 American.
The southern German state of Bavaria had become a magnet for right-wing radicals, including Hitler. And in the midst of this crisis, the state commissar of Bavaria, Gustav von Kahr, thought the time was right to overthrow the national government in Berlin.
At this moment, von Kahr and others saw in Hitler a very useful ally. Here was this man with great energy who could be recruited for the toppling of the government in Berlin.
With Rome's paramilitary forces and Hitler's ability to inspire them, Röhm and Hitler were well positioned to assist von Kahr with any revolt.
At the same time, Hitler saw a possible coalition to hatch a coup. A putsch is the German term for coup. Hitler saw an opportunity. This might be the objective revolutionary situation that he could use.
But when von Kahr was warned off by the head of the German army in Berlin, von Kahr decided to wait. Hitler was outraged. He'd brought his stormtroopers to the brink, and he could not back down.
At that point, Hitler has reached the position where if he pulls away from the putsch now, if he doesn't go through with it, his standing in the paramilitaries might be blown once and for all. So Hitler then decides to go for it.
Hitler gathered his stormtroopers outside a large beer hall where von Kahr was making a speech. Storming the stage, Hitler fired a shot into the ceiling and proclaimed that the revolution had begun. He called for a march against the government and led his followers out into the streets.
Hitler's notions seemed to be that once this march took place, somehow the population would rally round the march, so the masses would rise up against the Berlin government.
But the masses did not rise up. As Hitler and his stormtroopers approached a large square, they were confronted by the Munich police. It is unclear who fired the first shot, but within minutes, 14 stormtroopers and 4 police lay dead. Hitler suffered only a dislocated shoulder.
Hitler himself was injured when the person he was linking arms with was shot dead, so what if the bullet had been 18 inches to the side? Again, world history would have been different.
Hitler managed to escape, but 2 days later he was arrested and taken to Landsberg prison. As he awaited trial for high treason, he told the prison psychologist, "I'm finished. If I had a revolver, I would use it."
But from this political catastrophe, well, a catastrophe, it was ludicrous. Hitler would, of course, in the trial in the spring of 1924, transform what had been a terrific political setback into a political triumph.
He turned to the judges directly and said, "Judge, I am guilty. I am responsible. You also want this democracy to be ended, but you don't have the courage. I have the courage to stand for my principles. And if that makes me guilty, then I admit it, guilty as charged, because I have a vision of this country, born in the trenches of 1914. And the rhetoric went on, and headlines all over Germany reported it everywhere.